All right, let's get some more analysis then on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo. Prof, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Prof, it seems that the war between Russia and Ukraine has been brewing for some time now, and Putin has been preparing for himself, it seems, for this particular conflict. What are we missing as the international community on the relations between these two countries? And no doubt it goes way back and has a lot to do with this issue of the joining of Ukraine to NATO, as they've pleaded in the past. To take us back.
Look, in my view, or in fact, based on the readings and research that I do as an academic, you see, the point is that we never really interrogated fully the implications of the disintegration of Soviet space post-1989. Instead, we went on a celebratory mood that is the end of history, is the victory of liberal democracy all over the world. You know, the fact that we didn't interrogate it thoroughly is actually coming back to bite us with numerous questions we are failing to answer. And also it's coming back to bite us in as far as elements of misdirection of Western European and American strategy in dealing with this crisis.
And I mean, when you talk about our failure to interrogate, surely it's not aligned to whether or not Putin, as the Russian leader, is justified in the actions that he's putting across. I mean, some that do, of course, agree with him would say, listen, the man is protecting his country, his territory, that part of Europe, so that, you know, the West doesn't come in and NATO doesn't have access through Ukraine to Russia. But one wonders, is there some sort of a justification on the part of Russia? I mean, a lot of people are calling him this madman who's war hungry. But if we are to interrogate, as you say we should, if we are to interrogate his reasoning or why he's behaving in the manner that he's behaving, is there any sense or any sort of justification for it?
Flo, I don't want to say justification. I wouldn't say justification at all. But I would say, is there any way in which we could understand why Russia is behaving the way it does, or why President Putin is doing what he's doing? To understand it, there is just a lot of historical factors one needs to look into. Besides the behavior of Ukraine, you see? Because Ukraine, the way it conducted its domestic affairs as a country, has not been very good, you see? But we're not saying there is justification to attack Ukraine. But as outsiders interested in world peace and global peace, we need to find perspectives to understand Russia and negotiate and help the two countries negotiate a settlement between the two of them. You see, one of the issues actually, which I see becoming a serious problem, is the nation building. Should I say the nationalism project carried over by Russia on the one hand and by Ukraine on the other hand. Russia's nationalism project is very authoritarian. And of course, it seeks to consolidate some of the Russian territories that disintegrated after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you see, that moved away, you see. And on the other hand, we do have the Ukrainian nationalism, you see, which I call it a liberal pro-Western nationalism. And then these nationalisms actually clash, because Russia cannot afford not to be a factor in Ukraine's political future.
Yeah.
You see? These countries have come a long way historically. In fact, in many respects, they are the same people. Yeah. You see?
Are we likely to see a sort of David and Goliath situation playing out? Of course, in my analogy, I mean Ukraine being the David and Russia being the Goliath. Some are saying that there was the president of Ukraine might have been underestimated by Putin. But it doesn't look as though Putin is giving up by any stretch of the imagination or by any means. But is there some sort of possibility that, in fact, Ukraine might, at the end of this, get its way?
That's a difficult one, Flo. Mm-hmm. That's a difficult one. The reason why I say that is because it actually depends on the extent and effect of interventions by European powers and America. And unfortunately, they have to tread it very carefully, you see, because depending on how they intervene, you see, the crisis might actually get so complex and very dangerous for all humanity. Let me underline that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how their measured approaches are going to have effect on bringing the two countries, the two leaders, to a point where they actually sit, talk, argue, identify points of that are common, you see, to both of them, so as to reach quickly a position of peace.
Yeah. You know, you talk about, intervening, and, a lot of people are asking about the BRICS countries who, at this point, one's not really certain as to where they stand. China hasn't, by certain ways, expressed how or where they stand. South Africa's done, some condemnation of Russia's actions, but for the most part, it seems that there is still a bit of unity when it comes to the BRICS nations. How should they be intervening? I know we're talking a lot about, the UK, the US and so forth, but how should they be speaking in one voice, or what should actually be happening when it comes to those BRICS nations, if at all BRICS is something that we are still considering and still talking about? I know I've seen very little from South Africa in terms of talking about whether or not we are still part of BRICS, but how, when you talk about intervening, should those BRICS nations indeed be intervening?
In fact, in my view, the BRICS powers should play a very prominent role in getting the two countries, the two leaders, to talk, because they do need to talk. You see, Russia has put proposals, you see, which define the conditions. You see, Russia is prepared to accept negotiations with Ukraine. You see. And I think this is the space where BRICS countries should actually step in to facilitate that kind of dialogue, you see, and help the two countries slowly find a common ground, because it's not going to happen overnight, you see. But unfortunately, BRICS countries are so careful in this matter. If you see how India is responding, and how China, even though China is largely, it's almost clear it's supporting Russia, but BRICS countries are very careful, because we're living through an era of a reconfiguration of global power.
Yeah.
You see, when you're going through that period, you see, you find that various countries are very careful, you see, about how they craft their niches related to issues that are controversial and contradictory. South Africa, of course, is a member of the BRICS, but of course, South Africa is a very small country in the BRICS partnership. And you can clearly see that the country is really trying to deal with the matter as carefully as is possible.
Yeah.
Because really we don't know how things may turn out by tomorrow.
Exactly. Prof, I suppose another difficult one here, who would Putin, who would Russia actually listen to? I mean, if we're looking at his relationships with other leaders, it doesn't seem as though he's particularly respectful of, let's just say, I'll give France as an example. I mean, the French president was in Russia a couple of weeks ago, and he showed kind of disregard to that. I'm just wondering, who in history, if we look at history and Putin's history, would he actually listen to? Which voice of reason would he perhaps engage with and listen to?
I still believe Putin has an ear for the Chinese.
Okay.
You see, it's because, I mean, they share a long history of leftist communist orientation. You see, and there are also very deep going economic relations between the two countries. I still think he could have a serious ear for the Chinese. But the problem is that for now, they actually share, should I say, common anger about what happened after perestroika and glasnost. You see, the collapse of communism and the challenges post-communist states had to deal with, you see. They share the same anger about the influence of Western powers in all these developments. But I think economic rationality, economic forces will eventually get Putin to a point where he at least is willing to have a serious conversation and take advice from countries like China.
All right. Prof. Kondlo, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much for giving us your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right. That is Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo, political and international relations analyst.